Hi, welcome back to In Too Deep, a podcast with me, Alyssa. In this podcast, we go a little too deep into everything feminism, from 50 Shades of Grey to the Marquis de Sade to why the fuck is that Hermione Harry Potter fan fiction in like the front window of every single bookstore that I walk past. Free me from Alchemized. Anyway, in this episode, we're talking about dark romance. Episode 20. Welcome to episode 20. How crazy is that, guys? How crazy is that, guys? Also, I want to do a disclaimer before we start. I got the podcast monetized, which is like maybe kind of annoying for you as a listener because now you have to listen to ads. And I also don't know what the ads are going to be. So I'm just going to trial it and see how it goes. Money's not going to go to me, obviously. Actually, maybe that wasn't obvious, but money's not going to go to me. I don't know how much I'm going to get from it, but it's going to go to like some feminist charity or something. I'll figure it out. I'm not going to lie, it'll probably be like 10 cents per episode. So I don't really know if they'll even want that, but we'll see. And I'm sorry if the ads are annoying. Actually, tell me if you don't want them because I might just turn them off. I might just like demonetize myself. Anyway, likely my most requested episode about dark romance or dark romantasy or like AO3 morally reprehensible slop that's on every fucking Kmart shelf. And I really mean like every Kmart shelf. Like I literally looked at the Kmart website. If you don't know, Kmart's like Target. I don't know, they just have like random stuff. And I didn't want to calculate because they have a lot of books, but like I would say at least 50% of the books on the website are like just like the dark romance, like the most disgusting thing you've ever seen, and like a really fugly cover, just all around like bad. Someone commented on my TikTok the other day actually that Kmart has just like incest books chilling on the shelves. And I think they're talking about Credence by Penelope Douglas, which is a great example of a really popular dark romance book that has some really questionable themes. Also, on that like same note of like why is there only dark romance books available? So like where I used to live in WA, kind of nearby to where I lived, there was like this independent bookstore opening. I was like, fuck, this is so cool. Like I can't wait until they open. Like this is gonna be so fun. Riddle me why they only sell dark romance. like it's a dark romance bookstore. You realize you can just get those books at a normal bookstore. Why do you need a whole store of just dark romance? Like I can't even explain to you. Like I'm obviously never going to go here. Actually, maybe I should for like some like research purpose. I don't know. But it's actually like terrifying. Like all of the shelves are just like some like alpha wolf male with this like really tiny little girl. And really cool that that's the only like independent bookseller near where I used to live. That's great. That's really great. Anyway, also I cut my hair. I didn't talk about that, but you can probably tell that I cut my hair if you're watching the video. I explained this on my TikTok, but the reason I cut it was because I watched Erica Titus's video where she like shaved her head because she just felt like she kind of needed to like separate herself from her appearance, and she was like too obsessed with her appearance. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, wow, like my hair is always fucking awful, and like I hate it, and it never looks how I wanted it to, and I just like get so obsessed with it. And I was like, why don't I just cut it off? So I cut it off. Getting into the actual meat of dark romance. Ew. I'm sure anyone listening to this already has an idea of what dark romance means, and is also aware of the increase in a book being published under this subgenre, as well as like the surge in popularity on, you know, BookTok in the last few years. It's been really terrifying and bad, actually. According to Circana, a supplier of books sales tracking statistics in the US, the volume of romance books has more than doubled compared to 4 years ago. And also, 4 out of 10 of the best-selling books by April last year, for like 2025, were by Rebecca Yarros. If you guys know her, you know her. If you don't know, though, author of Fourth Wing and Onyx Storm. I'm not going to read either of those. Side note, she apparently started writing while her husband was deployed in Afghanistan, which like, whoa, that makes so much sense. Well, you have a husband who was in the military and he was deployed in Afghanistan, and you write dark romance. No fucking way. Like that's, yeah, no fucking way. You might ask yourself, well, like, why are these dark romance books so popular? Especially if you're someone who doesn't read them. Like, you'd be like, well, what do you mean? There's like a bajillion books being published every year that are in this weird dark romance category. Simple answer, women hate themselves. Longer answer, listen to the rest of the episode. Also rape culture. Another side note, a further 2 out of 10 of the best-selling books of April last year were those fuck-ass like self-help books that men read. So all we have is like women reading books that are telling them they're powerless and like rape fantasies, and men being told how to manipulate people into thinking they're powerful with like psychological 48 laws of power. Wow, what a cool society to live in, guys. Most internet sources define dark romance as simply romance novels with darker or controversial themes, morally grey characters, and extremely passionate romance. I think in the current context, at least, I would better define it as books that continuously remind women that abuse is sexy and rape is sexy and a man being violent and misogynistic and woman hating is sexy. And even while we continuously try to move away from rape culture as a society, we continuously have all of these like freak ass books being published. The more commonplace definition is probably more applicable to dark romanticism, a subgenre of romanticism, which emerged as a reaction to, well, romanticism, the artistic movement in the late 18th century. I studied some romantic poets when I was in school. I don't really have that good of a memory of it, but from what I do remember, Romanticism was essentially a reaction against the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution, and the focus on logic, science, and reason and rationality. I feel like mainly Romanticism focused on the sublimity of nature, but also human emotion and imagination without concrete reason. And also the concept of like some sort of like innate goodness in humanity as well. In turn, dark romanticism was not a return to scientific reason, but rather a focus on the innate evilness in people and a questioning of humanity and its goodness. And I suppose it also explored ideas of like human emotion, like dark human emotions, things like that. Bella Rosanes writes in an opinion piece published in The Badger, from the 1800s onwards, dark romanticism was used to counter the euphoria and sublimity brought by romance, becoming a popular genre not only in books but also artwork. It commonly intertwined like supernatural elements like the monster in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or haunting and ghosts like in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, which I just finished reading. It was quite good. Vampires as well sort of originated in dark romanticism or like gothicism as well, but became more common by the end of the 19th century, like with Dracula. Rosanes continues, what once was a genre filled with fatalistic philosophy, written poetic charms, and cultural underpinnings of the time, turned into pop culture fantasy disguised with romance and directed with traumatic meet-cutes. So how did we get here? What she's questioning basically in that opinion piece is like how romanticism got turned into initially like romance books, but also how dark romanticism turned into dark romance as it is today, when they're almost entirely unrelated in like what they actually explore. Dark romanticism is maybe the early roots for dark romance today. What I would say is the biggest difference, though, besides the fact that every fucking dark romance book that has ever been written is like competing for the worst book to ever be written. Like, it's why are they all like I can't even like express to you how bad the writing is. Like, I don't even know. Like, it's so bad. Anyway, the actual difference that I was going to talk about is that the use of romantic relationships in early dark romanticism was to explore sort of the corruption and dark sides of human nature. Not to make light of or worse, sexualize these, but to rather just explore them as concepts. Nowadays, dark romance books, while usually not exploring anything at all except for like how many chili peppers of spice level will this get on BookTok? Yeah, besides that, it doesn't really explore anything as well at all. But also it to an extent does explore like the dark sides of human nature, such as men being prone to abuse and violence against women, but these are not, criticized at all. They're just sexualized and romanticized as something positive and like something erotic. For example, coming back to Wuthering Heights, The love interest, as it were, in Heathcliff is an irredeemable character. While, yes, Heathcliff and Kathy have sort of like an extremely passionate romance that, so much so that they are described as like one and the same. And then they like, she haunts him forever and then they become like ghosts together. What the hell, sure. But their love is doomed from the start, and that's kind of how it's meant to be. Through this and the use of supernatural and gothic elements, pathetic fallacy and characterization, ideas of class, race, gender, and psychology are deeply explored. This to me is what a dark romance should still be. The most evil thing is that apparently Emerald Fennell is turning this into like a BDSM movie. Wuthering Heights into a BDSM movie. With fucking Jacob Elordi. I hate him. I hate Jacob Elordi. When I watched Frankenstein, like, I was just pissed off that I had to look at his face the whole time. Like, I hate him. It's also important to mention the sort of other subgenre known as bodice rippers, which further paved the way for romance novels today. The Flame and the Flower by Kathleen Woodiwiss, published in 1972, is often referred to as the first modern bodice ripper romance novel. Guys, I don't know if I'm pronouncing bodice right. Bodice? Whatever. In this novel, the female main character is a poor orphan who kills a man who tried to rape her, and then ends up being arrested by two other men who think she's a prostitute. She gets taken onto a ship. The captain then rapes her. Upon finding out she's a virgin because her hymen broke during the rape, he realizes she wasn't a prostitute. But then he rapes her again, and then a third time after taking her hostage. And then he tries again, and then she's pregnant, and then they fall in love. Life goals, oh my god. And this was being sold as a romance book. That's actually the scariest thing that could ever possibly happen to you. Betsy O'Donovan writes in an article in Publishers Weekly, writers have been grappling with whether a rapist can be a hero since bodice rippers, so called because heroes tended to force themselves on virginal heroines. When books like this began storming the shelves in the 1970s, it was kind of maybe a little more understandable what with the gender roles at the time. Still a very strong expectation for women to get married and have children, be housewives, like submit to the every whim of their husband. Kathy Maxwell, a romance author quoted in this same article, says, "In those books in the 80s, we didn't see the male lead as a rapist. We saw him as a virile man who was so taken with his woman that he would do anything to have her." This is a reoccurring idea through dark romance and just like romance novels in general. That the male love interest is so like obsessed with the female character that he will do anything to have her. And this can be something simple like relentlessly pursuing her, relentlessly asking her out until she like eventually concedes and agrees, or something more extreme such as rape, which is common again in these dark romance books. Both these actions have like a similar underlying idea that love can be expressed through obsession and ownership, which is again a common lie told to women outside of books too, of course. The reemergence of dark romance today is almost entirely attributable to 50 Shades, which, as I'm sure most people know, was originally a Twilight fan fiction. I'll touch on how fanfic plays a huge role in this later, but is it not crazy that like Taylor Swift has a song on a BDSM movie soundtrack? Like, that's a bit insane when you actually think about it. Also, because the books and the film especially was so mainstream, like so available and normalized to watch this like fuck ass BDSM Twilight fanfic movie. I watched the film when I was 12 at a sleepover with like 10 other girls my age. Why were we doing that? I don't know. Don't remember the movie at all, so can't really talk about it. There was criticism of 50 Shades, obviously from feminists, but also people in supposed BDSM communities. Obviously, I'm against sexual relationships of this nature, regardless of consent involved, and believe they're abusive, again, regardless of whether there was consent or not. But people took issue with 50 Shades because it literally just portrayed an abusive relationship, but it was not marketed that way. Like, it was released on Valentine's Day weekend. It was meant to be a romantic movie, kind of like when It Ends With Us was released and they were like, no, Blake Lively was like, oh my God, grab your florals and bring all your friends to this romance movie. What? It wasn't a romance movie. What are you talking about? Criticism from people who do engage in BDSM, which, first of all, never mind, had to do with the film's portrayal of BDSM lifestyles and like equipment usage and safety. Like, you know that you're doing it, like, you know it's a bad movie when even the BDSM doers are like, mm-mm-mm. I low-key just realized I was filming that last clip in like extreme HD and it was like 40 gigs. So if you notice a drop off in the quality, I'm sorry, but like I don't have enough space for that. Anyway, perhaps it's better to define current dark romance as an offshoot of erotica rather than dark romanticism. Erotica instead would be seen as the root of current pornography, putting dark romance on a similar scale. And I'm not necessarily saying like all erotica is bad, but publishing of any, like essentially anything sexual under a patriarchal context is like, it's gonna have some underlying misogyny, like regardless of what you do, I fear. I'm gonna focus on a few like actually severely misogynistic and rapey examples, but that's not to say that all erotica has to be misogynistic. I just think it's pretty common. I genuinely feel like current dark romance authors and readers have a similar philosophy to the Marquis de Sade. If you're unaware, the man who brought about the term sadism. Yeah. Andrea Dworkin describes de Sade as the foremost pornographer in her 1981 book, Pornography, Men Possessing Women. I think de Sade is a really great example of how erotica or pornography are not just works of fiction, nor do they ever just stay as fantasies. In the Marquis de Sade, a new biography by Donald Thomas, Thomas writes that the cruelties of Sade's fiction are quite at variance with almost all of his conduct, and that most of his sexual desires were indulged largely in his fiction. We've heard this before. Pornography is just fantasy. Like, it just stays a fantasy. Like, okay. Dworkin, more accurately, on the other hand, writes, his life and writing were a whole cloth soaked in the blood of women, imagined and real. He was a batterer, rapist, kidnapper, and child abuser. In his work, he relentlessly celebrated brutality as the essence of eroticism. Fucking, torture, and killing were fused, violence and sex synonymous. Side note here, celebrated supposed feminist Simone de Beauvoir wrote a lengthy apology for Sade and actually supported him. French people be like, as such, it's not the writing of Mary Shelley or the Bronte sisters which led to dark romance as it is today, but rather the writing of men like Sade, a devout libertine who kidnapped, raped, and tortured tens of women and children in the name of free thinking and a rebellious view of sex and pleasure. Like, this is what dark romance readers sound like to me. You are the Marquis de Sade incarnate, actually. Like Sade, dark romance books are not just fantasies. They are a direct recreation of the sadistic tendencies of men in real life and the rape culture that has destroyed and continues to destroy millions of women's lives. Another good example of an older erotica novel which paved the way for current dark romance is the 1954 novel The Story of O, published by Anne Desclaux. Also a French person, by the way. Like, what the fuck is up with these people? Like, why is weird stuff always coming out of France? I'm sorry. The Story of O is a good example of a woman writing hate crimes against herself and is discussed at length in Woman Hating also by Dworkin. Dworkin discusses how the story of O, in a way, defines what it is to be female and feminine. It links men and women in an erotic dance of some magnitude. The sadomasochistic complexion of the story of O is not trivial. It is formulated as a cosmic principle which articulates absolutely the feminine. In its simplest form, the novel is about a girl who was only ever referred to as O, and she's basically sexually enslaved and raped and fucked in insane sadistic ways by all these men, and then she kills herself. Like, fuck. What a good storyline, guys. Like, what? Emily at Villette Angel on TikTok also discusses the story of O as a precursor to current dark romance in a Substack essay titled A Critique of Dark Romance. She writes that this book at the time was seen as revolutionary and praised by a multitude of scholars, despite there being nothing revolutionary about women being chattel to men. The sadist is almost always the man who is determined to break down a woman, and this woman is always the masochist, who is portrayed as enjoying being abused. Similar to Sade's work, violent pornography against women is always praised as supposedly rebellious and outside of societal norms, especially when it occurs in like sort of like art house, like films and things like that. Maybe a little less for like classic pornography. But like, how is this outside of any expected social norm already? When every like marriage since the dawn of time has just been toned down sadomasochism. Also, Nara Smith, the other day I saw a video she posted, and the video starts with her husband, what's his name? Like Lucky Blue? Who called him that? And at the start of the video, he's like strangling her. And she's supposed to be like spokeswoman of the trad wives. What do you guys think sadomasochism is? And what do you think like porn is? It's just a recreation of being a trad wife. Like, and it's not vice versa, by the way. It's not vice versa because people will be like, a lot of these trad wives, like, they're just living out their like masochistic like fantasy or whatever. And it's like, no, you people who are living out your masochistic fantasy just wish you were a trad wife. Like, it's the other way around. Which came first? Wives or sadism, masochism? Yeah, have a think about that. Anyway, thinking that BDSM in any way has ever been new or revolutionary, or worst of all, queer, is just libertine Sade slop. The story of O does differ from Sade's work in the sense that what O goes through is kind of seen as consensual and enjoyable because it's like actually written to be erotica in that way, whereas in Sade's work and life, everything he did was for his own pleasure, which like honestly kind of respect that. Like, the worst thing for me about dark romance is that women are portrayed as liking it. Like, and the same goes for pornography. Like, through both of these things, women as a class, remember that, as a class are portrayed a specific way. Dworkin writes, the thesis of the story of O is simple. A woman is cunt, lustful, wanton. She must be punished, tamed, debased. She gives the gift of herself, her body, her well-being, her life to her lover. This is as it should be, natural and good. As such, dark romance and how popular it is becoming is teaching women to, well, be women. Women meaning submissive, sexually enslaved, and as Dworkin words it, needing to be punished. At least when like Sade was writing his work, like he didn't give a fuck if these women liked it or not. Like he was doing it because he wanted to. Like, that is kind of like better in a sense. It's not actually, he's fucking awful, but like it's better in a sense than being like, yeah, like I sexually enslaved this person, but they actually liked it, so it was okay. No, I don't think they did actually. I'm not sure how to word this as well, but I do genuinely believe that women like enjoy this content. Like, I don't think they're lying about enjoying it, but like enjoy is a bit of an interesting word. Rather, I do really believe they get like sexual satisfaction, entertainment, and, you know, whatever else from consuming this content, which sexualizes our collective abuse. But obviously, this enjoyment isn't spontaneous. Even normal romance books, before they became all like freakish and rapey, they were always like that, to be fair, existed to normalize women's gender roles. Nowadays, though, it's even more dangerous because it's basically just like telling women that rape is actually sexy and rape is actually something that you want to happen to you. Like, what? The increase in sales of increasingly sexually violent literature is not a sign of women becoming more liberated, women becoming more like in touch with their sexuality or whatever else, but rather an indication that we are nowhere near female collective liberation. Ro at Lovelogian on Twitter writes in a tweet, in the liberal progressive imagination, eroticism takes on a kind of baptismal quality, the waters of which absolve and negate all historical and political context. Or perhaps a better way to put it is that all acts and images are transformed by erotic prelude, not stripped of context, but rather protected by the illusion that the context itself has become safe to lean into if the product of this exercise is orgasm. I think this is a really good way to word. I mean, I think it's mainly in context of like extreme pornography and whatever else. But it's a good way to see how like women will sort of defend rape in a dark romance form because it's not real rape, it's erotic rape. Without seeing that those two things are the same things. The context of it being erotica doesn't actually change anything at all. In fact, it probably makes it worse to see it as sexual. rather than like as an extreme form of violence. After discussing some earlier erotica work, I feel like I should delve into some dark romance books. I don't really want to. Some like series, some authors, why they're both evil and uphold rape culture, but also just like badly written. Before I do that though, like I need to do a quick detour into discussing BookTok. Obviously, the entire concept of BookTok has had like such negative impacts, especially in promoting these dark romance books. A lot of people wouldn't have heard about any of these without how popular and posted about TikToks became under the hashtag BookTok. In a thesis by Tegan Bailey Fortune, she discusses the influence of BookTok erotica and dark romance on how young people perceive consent and boundaries. The findings of her research revealed that 1. BookTok fosters an environment where young adults internalize the depicted behavior. 2. Young adults are becoming desensitized to explicit material and more accepting of problematic behavior. And 3. Many young adults have noticed a shift in their views on consent and boundaries after engaging with the BookTok community. One issue she highlighted is obviously that books recommended by BookTok creators who post on BookTok are often dark romance or erotica. And especially for younger women, these contribute to the cultivation of sexual scripts or sexual education in itself. Sexual scripts being like, I guess like how people view sex as occurring. For example, for men, I guess, they're more likely to verbalize consent and also react to verbalized consent, react to verbalized like taking back of consent as well. Whereas women, because a lot of women are, you know, in a way they see themselves as submissive, they don't like to speak out, they're less likely to verbalize consent or verbalize the lack of consent and rather show that through physical movements, which are often not picked up by men because there's a difference in the sexual scripts between men and women. Her research also showed how rape culture depicted in dark romance is socially learned and normalized as acceptable conduct in relationships. She writes, often the presence of rape culture in these texts are veiled and presented to the reader as ideal or desirable relationships. This influences how the young women who read this kind of literature understand consent, also understand intimate partner violence, but also their ability to recognize red flags, I guess, or signs of intimate partner violence. I can't tell you the amount of times I've seen TikToks about domestic violence, particularly the sort of statistic about how if a man strangles you, he's like X percentage more likely to kill you. A lot of the comments will be from women who either like watch pornography or read these sorts of books and are like, but what if you consent to it? Babe, we're actually not talking about that right now. We're talking about women dying at the hands of men who abuse them in domestic relationships. What do you mean? And I think that makes sense in the context of how taking in this sort of media changes how people view these relationships kind of in a more positive way. They stop understanding consent. Their sexual scripts are developed in like a really bad way that is not helpful to forming meaningful and healthy relationships. One author who was heavily recommended on BookTok, maybe not so much anymore because everyone already knows who she is, but kind of early when BookTok started, was Colleen Hoover. I have to admit, I have read a Colleen Hoover book, and it was because of BookTok, okay? When I was younger, like pre-high school, I used to read all the time. Like literally, I would make my mum go into the book depository, which I don't know if that website still exists, and I would make her order me like 5 books like every month. And they were probably all really good. I like when I started high school at age 12, by the way, I like did not read a single book. Like I'm not even kidding. I did not read a book. At least I didn't finish one. Even the ones we had to read for school, never read them. I don't know how I was still like passing, but shout out Spark Notes. But after high school, because I guess I had some more time, tried to get back into reading. I thought I would find what's a really popular book right now. Like, let me look on TikTok, let me look on Goodreads, like, etc., whatever else. Let me see what people are recommending. And In 2021, that book was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, the sixth best-selling book of that year. And this book was in every single book recommendation TikTok. It was everywhere. Like, I assumed it would be a really good book, you know? As soon as I read Lily Blossom Bloom, I should have put the book down. But I didn't. I did indeed read it, and it was not good. Like, I don't even understand, like, even if you were like a dark romance fan, why you'd be recommending that shit. Like, it really wasn't good. Why was she talking to Ellen DeGeneres? What was that? Um, of course, it wasn't dangerous for me to be reading this book when I was like 20 and already pretty educated on feminism, and I was not at risk of co-parenting with an abusive father of my child. However, the fact that this book was pushed so heavily on an app like TikTok, where many of the people viewing these sorts of videos, especially in 2021, were younger people, particularly when like BookTok kind of probably started during COVID. Like, most of the people who were on TikTok during COVID were people who like couldn't go to school because they had nothing else to do, and they were just fucking on TikTok to kill time. And so the people that are seeing these sorts of videos are often like either trying to get into reading or, you know, don't have a lot of knowledge about it, like me, and that's mostly constituting of young women. To promote these sorts of books to girls and women is like almost a form of grooming. I don't think I'm crazy for thinking that. Like, already these books, as I mentioned, sort of position women in a very specific and like naturalized submissive way. So feeding this sort of content to girls is literally grooming them to like accept this sort of behavior from men and grooming them to end up in these abusive relationships. While the horrific writing in Colleen Hoover books is a problem in itself, like, there's a reason no one can read these days, because even when they do, it's fucking Colleen Hoover. A bigger problem is her romanticization of abusive relationships. And actually, I'll give her some credit here. I don't think she's actually the worst in terms of romanticizing them, even though she does, but there's definitely worse authors than her in that regard. But to be fair, I've only read It Ends With Us, and I know that she has some worse books in that sort of category. Jenny Young writes in the 2022 article, like too many books and movies, It Ends With Us feeds into the very structure of toxic masculinity that it purports to combat. It romanticizes red flags and glorifies a charismatic but dangerous man. He's complicated, he's damaged, and it ultimately delivers a decidedly anti-feminist message. While the abuse in It Ends With Us is not particularly romanticized, at least not as much as many other books do it, it's the characterization of, I think his name is Ryle, which, first of all, that's not a name. Neither is Lily Blossom Bloom, but sure. It's his characterization that's kind of the real issue. We see him as this like dark, haunted by his past person, with bad temper issues. But as Young notes, the third time Ryle attacks Lily in the book, the third time, by the way, reveals him to be a sadistic, premeditating, and cruel person. You know, it's not just his bad temper that's making him like act out and be violent. And even if that were the case, like, you'd think he would be being violent to like other people too, not just like this woman he's seeing. Anyway, she writes, it is not an example of a poor tortured soul who loses control. On the contrary, it's a chilling portrayal of a calculated and violent sexual attack. Ryle assaults her, pulls her hair, strangles her, and attempts to rape her. Lily later realizes she's pregnant and eventually decides to co-parent with Ryle, as she decides parents have to work through their differences and bring a level of maturity into a situation in order to do what's best for the child. Somehow I think what's best for the child is to not keep it around its father who pushed you down the stairs. Did you ever think about that, Lily Blossom Bloom? Did you ever think about that? And in my 2022 review of It Ends With Us, after I read it, I wrote, this was so bad. Why did she not abort the baby when its dad literally pushed her down the stairs? And I stand by that. If you didn't want to abort it, that's fine, but like, why was he co-parenting with you? Again, while this book isn't as bad as many other examples, which I'll get into, it still pushes for like empathy towards men who are abusive in relationships when really they don't deserve it at all, at least not from the women that they're abusing. You know, they can go to like some prison help program to help them stop abusing women, but they don't need empathy from women who they abuse. in doing this, it also, you know, it encourages forgiveness for men who engage in abusive behavior, when realistically no woman has to forgive a man if he's doing that to her. Like, she does not have to do that. So another kind of subgenre of dark romance is dark romantasy, which is maybe one of the worst things produced by humankind. Maybe not, but it's pretty bad. When writing this episode, I saw a tweet which was a screenshot of a TikTok of some random man reading Onyx Storm, which I did talk about, by Rebecca Yarros, with the caption, "Point of view, you realize smutty books are instruction manuals, not competition." To which someone had quote tweeted, "Looks like the non-toxic men are catching on. I'm so happy for their significant others." You're happy their significant others are about to get like assaulted? Anyway, I feel like Onyx Storm isn't the best example. I did Google one of the sex scenes in the book just to like see what was going on. Not awful abuse wise, definitely awful writing wise. Potentially one of the worst scenes I've ever written. Yeah, that's right, guys. I'm actually, my pen name is Rebecca Yarros. That's me in the flesh. No, that's it's definitely one of the worst things I've ever read. Other series like ACOTAR, which is likely one of the most popular series, which has some elements of dark romance, also has a lot of elements of misogyny. Not even necessarily like the dark romance shit, but regardless, there's misogyny present in these novels, even when you're not talking about like necessarily the romance parts. While a lot of this has to do with the sort of tropes present in most romantasy books, like teeny tiny feminine fairy, giant muscular alpha wolf centaur. There's also the concept of mates as in like animalistic mates in ACOTAR, which I will not read. I didn't even say what this stands for. Like, I just assumed everyone knows what ACOTAR is. A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Which, by the way, she has been in some hot water too. I didn't even research that, so I don't know. Anyway, I'm not going to read the book. I was not going to read the book for this episode. That would actually be torturous. But from what I've read, there is a society of fays. I think that means fairies, wherein male fays form a mating bond with female fays and become obsessive and crazy to own their female fae. What are we talking about? Alicia Grasso writes an opinion piece in Screen Rant about these books and how misogynistic they are. She writes, once the mating bond snaps into place, it then shifts to the woman making babies as fast as she can. Why do you guys need to read this shit? Like, you can just look outside and say, like, married people. Of course, a lot of fantasy books kind of draw from a sort of like medieval era vibe and like, well, fantasy, like fairies and stuff. Wherein obviously like misogyny in real like medieval times, which didn't include fairies, it was quite misogynistic, very rampant misogyny in social structures, things like that. The problem isn't really with writing about fantasy in general. Of course, there's like probably so many really good fantasy books. And honestly, I'd love to read some. Can you guys recommend me a fantasy book that doesn't have fairies in it, nor does it have alpha wolf, 6'9" centaur? Anyway, sorry, I got off topic. The problem isn't really with writing like about these things in general, but rather how much it's romanticized in these kinds of books. The mate trope especially is just like so disgusting, and it's always focused on how the man gets this like animalistic urge to possess the woman and not vice versa. Like if they both had like an animalistic urge for each other, I'd be like, sure, but it's never that way. It's always like this man like chasing after this little fairy woman and being like basically like forcing himself on her. It also reminds me of those like, this is so funny to me. It reminds me of those like portrait mode shot shows that are like made to be viewed specifically on TikTok. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen them. I remember me and my sister, like, one came up as an ad on my TikTok, but it was like a 40-minute long ad, and I like almost watched the whole thing because it was so fucking funny. Like, it's always just like, I'm an alpha in the wolf clan, and it's like, dude, you're a human. You're not even dressed up like a wolf. Like, I don't know, maybe if they like made it cool and they like made Like that whole Omegaverse thing. Maybe if they were actually werewolves, I'd be like, this is fun. No, they're just people. And they're like, I'm the alpha and I can smell my omega. Like, Alicia Grasso also discusses another society or culture present in the Akatar universe of the Illyrians. Grasso writes, it's genuinely horrifying how Illyrians treat women who dare to break free of Aurelian, guys, what the fuck is this word? Illyrian culture's backward and restrictive social norms. Rape is common, and raped Illyrian women have no recourse for justice, and even women in Illyrian society buy into this misogynistic view. While apparently the books somewhat acknowledge the fact that both the Fae society and the Illyrian society, their cultures are misogynistic and outdated, Grasso does not think that they go far enough. Why in the first place as an author would you use such outdated social ideas to like build up your fantasy world? Like if I'm writing a fantasy world, I'm not putting in fucking like these like mating tropes. Like why would you build this fantasy world of things that are already like oppressed onto women? Especially when you're not even critiquing them. You're just like, so this is how their society works. Like make a better one. You're the author, make a better one. Grasso writes, it's tired to constrict their story to the outdated constraints of such toxicity, and the romances to a heterosexual binary that exclusively revolves around becoming a mother. To use these stereotypes in the first place is tired and boring, but to romanticize them and force ideas about dominance and submission into all the heterosexual relationships, it's like, oh, so you like the patriarchy. So you're actually a fan of the patriarchy and you also hate women. Even so, Akatar, not the worst romance fantasy gets. I talked about in the intro the Hermione book, which is fucking everywhere. You might have seen this book recently. I have been to a lot of bookstores recently because I've been buying some new books, mostly like secondhand bookstores, which thankfully don't have alchemized in them yet. But I've been going to like some new bookstores as well. As you can see behind me, my little book collection that I have curated since I moved to Melbourne is growing. I bought Beloved by Toni Morrison yesterday. Isn't the cover so cute? Anyway, you might have seen this book called Alchemized. I know I have because every time I need to go to the bathroom at work, I have to walk past a QBD bookstore and they have it in the front window. And every time I'm like, oh, it's fucking Alchemized again. Like, piss me off. Bit of backstory to this book. It was first shared under the name Manacled on, I believe, Aro3, which I will discuss more later, at the start of 2018. And the last chapter was posted by the end of 2019. It was originally a Harry Potter fanfiction that took inspiration from The Handmaid's Tale. At the start of 2025, it was removed from the web as it was being rewritten for a traditional novel released, as we know it today, Alchemized, and outside of the Harry Potter universe. Kind of like how Twilight was made into the Master of the Universe. Is that what it's called? I don't know. And then it got turned into 50 Shades. A production company has also purchased the rights to make it into a film series. And I'll be sat in the cinema. I can't wait for that one to come out. As I mentioned, the book also took inspiration from The Handmaid's Tale. Not just that though, it's actually built on romanticized dynamics of the Handmaid's Tale universe. It was also little piece of trivia for you. It was the most popular Draco x Hermione fanfiction ever written. I feel like you can't write a Draco and Hermione fanfiction without it being abusive because of like unless you fully change the source material, because like he was being like racist to her, like that's so awkward. I was looking for some information about this book from people who have actually read it because guys, I'm not reading 1,000 pages of Harry Potter torture porn for this episode. I'm really sorry I'm not doing that. I found this YouTube video by Willow Talks Books. Well, she's basically tearing this book to shreds. I actually loved it. She also says the reason she picked up this book initially, because she's not someone who reads dark romance, is because of the way it was marketed. It was marketed as sort of a huge dark fantasy epic, which understandably sounds pretty cool. And it wasn't like dark fantasy as in like dark romantic fantasy, like dark fantasy as in like gothic. As she talks about in her video, one of her favorite books is Wuthering Heights. So she thought it would have a similar vibe to that, being like such a huge epic book. She was met with something completely different, as she describes the book as a lengthy torture fantasy. Much of the time when people like me criticize dark romance, we get told, it's not actually a romance. It's just writing about a toxic relationship. Like, you can write about toxic relationships without it being romance. But the thing is, it's always romance. It is being romanticized. Like, of course you can write about a toxic relationship. Of course you can. Don't romanticize though, because you always do. The original fanfic on AO3 had the tags romance and slow burn. Probably had some crazy other ones as well that I'm glad I didn't have access to. It's interesting as well that this specific book takes a lot of inspiration from The Handmaid's Tale, an explicitly feminist book by Margaret Atwood, which evidently discusses similar themes as Alchemized. It must, if Alchemized has taken inspiration from the universe of The Handmaid's Tale. Therefore, it's pretty obvious that you can write about these things in a way that doesn't romanticize them. In a feminist way, you absolutely can. But the author of Alchemized, Senlin Yu, is simply choosing not to do that. Obviously, it's a Hermione fan fiction. Like, we're not getting feminism out of that. Some things that the male main character, aka Draco Malfoy, does is give the female main character, Hermione, brain inflammation and seizures, electrocutes her, holds her hostage, rapes her daily for 2 weeks, amongst other things. He also snaps the neck of a 12-year-old child in front of her, and then also kills the 12-year-old child's mother. Yeah, fuck, like, I'm finding him really attractive. Yeah, I understand how this is a romance book. I'm finding him really attractive from that description. If you want to know more about how bad this book is, I do recommend you watch Willow's video. It'll be linked in the resources. She talks very bluntly, which is great when you're discussing this sort of thing. Willow also describes just generally romance fiction as, quote, toxic, lazy, conservative propaganda, which thank God someone else is saying it. When these sorts of overly sexual and oftentimes abusive books started being written for women by women, it was never like because of or to further push women's liberation. It is literally conservative propaganda, which keeps women in abusive relationships, which keeps women wanting to be married, wanting to be housewives, wanting to be submissive to their husbands. It keeps women from recognizing signs of abuse and women hatred because they have been sexualized in this sort of context and romanticized by content like porn and these romance books, which are becoming ever more popular. There are definitely other like extreme examples of romantasy, dark romantasy, like Alchemized. But yeah, oftentimes it gets even worse. For example, in Haunting Adeline, another really popular dark romance book, doesn't have the fantasy element though. The female main character gets stalked and raped by the male main character. So that's another like great example of a really popular book. Sold a lot of copies. And that's like what it's about. Interestingly, none of these books ever actually face repercussions for the content that they showcase. Obviously, I mean, like, even though I'm talking about how crazy it is that these books are published, we still do kind of accept that like romance books like this are allowed to be published and purchased by people. A book that did face repercussions, and I think I've talked about this before, was a book published by Australian author Tori Woods at the start of this year. Start of this year, girl, start of last year. This book, titled Daddy's Little Toy, was a daddy/little girl kink book. But it wasn't just a kink, like he was a daddy and she was a little girl. In this book, the male love interest finds the female love interest attractive when she's 3 years old. When this book first got published and people were kind of discussing it, obviously, for the most part, in a very disgusted manner, there were still people who, like, even if they were disgusted by it, they were bringing up the case of being against literature censorship. And because they're so against censorship, they still think this sort of book should be allowed to be published. Which is just like, okay. In this case, the author was arrested for possession and distribution of child pornography. Thank God. Obviously, this is a great thing. The people who are writing about sexual attraction to children, even under the guise of kink, are facing repercussions for it. That is a great thing in my book. But it does make you think. In Australia, illegal online content is described as content that shows, describes, promotes, incites, or instructs people in violent crimes, including sexual exploitation of children, terrorism, murder, rape, torture, amongst a few other things. And Australia, under the Australian laws, that is why that woman was arrested for possession and distribution of child sexual abuse material. This also the type of material that can kind of be produced when you like make books and movies and whatever else. They kind of have to go through like the classification board. They also decide on what content is deemed like illegal pornography and also what types of porn can be imported and exported. This info is a bit outdated. I'm actually not too sure like how accurate this is these days. I got it from like an ABC article, which low-key this article was really fucking weird. It was by some man. I don't know. It was by some man and he was low-key acting like these laws for classifying pornography were like bad. I was like, you don't have to bring your porn addiction to your journalist job. But there are a lot of things which are restricted by the classification board. Put simply, no depiction of sexual violence is allowed, no fetishes, no physical violence, even including spanking, hair pulling, no sexually assaultive language, etc. Yet, obviously, a lot of this content is very obviously allowed and easy to find with one Google search. Basically, my point here is that while it was good, this author who wrote that Weird Daddy book, it's good that she faced repercussions for that. In the grand scheme of sexual abuse, though, she was actually publishing probably one of the least bad things. Essentially, all pornography that is produced is worse than this book, realistically, because it includes real people, oftentimes real children. Yeah, this book was a bit fucked, but realistically, was it going to make like some man become a pedophile and abuse a child? Probably not. What my actual point was is that why can an author be arrested for producing content, including minors, but it be absolutely fine to have on the Target shelves when it includes rape and torture porn? Aren't these things both illegal based on like classification board standards? I didn't really look into the laws here. I don't want to, but I just want to ask the question, okay? Why is that like she publishes that, she immediately gets arrested for possession, distribution of child porn? You publish a book about raping someone, it's totally fine and you can have it like accessible to children in Kmart. So then we come to the very debated concept of censorship, which is when I want to discuss AO3. If you haven't heard of AO3, it was the platform that Alchemized was published on, as I mentioned. It was created in 2007 and named after Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, called Archive of Our Own, which is what AO3 stands for. It was apparently created after the massive content purge of 18 plus content on fanfiction.net, where 50 Shades was initially posted and then got removed because it violated the site's rules, then got republished on a website just called 50shades.com. It's really interesting that they named the site after a quite feminist book by Virginia Woolf, seeing how extremely misogynistic the content it hosts is. Just opening AO3 and looking at the browse page, pretty much every fanfic you're met with has extreme violence content warnings, almost entirely to do with sexual violence. Even if you're not pro-censorship per se, I would think even if you're not pro-censorship that you would still be against posting content that is like actually fucking insane. AO3 essentially allows you to post whatever you want, including rape, incest, pedophilia, bestiality, among anything else you could possibly think of. AO3 continuously maintains the policy of maximum inclusiveness, basically just including anything that anyone ever wants to post on the website as totally fine. Which is interesting because since when has inclusivity been about letting people write about romantic rape? Okay, whenever someone questions why AO3 allows this sort of content, it's generally met with, hey, like you can just filter out the content that you don't want to see. Like, just press the button that excludes sexual violence and you won't see it. Like, no, I don't actually think I want to use a website that hosts that at all. No one should be writing or reading about romanticized depictions of these things because no one should be getting sexual gratification from reading about rape or bestiality. Like, while most people won't just like stumble upon these disgusting fanfics on AO3 unless they're willingly looking for them, with more and more dark romance books being published, they're like piling up on the shelves of every bookstore, or rather any store that sells books at all. This content then becomes available and in fact advertised to anyone of any age. As Willow discussed in her video, she wasn't even aware that Alchemized was a dark romance book until she was like a quarter of the way through. Imagine if you have like a daughter who really likes dark like fantasies and like epic like Lord of the Rings sort of things, I don't fucking know, and you buy her Alchemized and then she's reading Hermione torture porn. Like, Obviously, pornography is always worse and always more available as well, always more consumed than reading, even to children. But this episode just has another focus on dark romance. So I'm not going to discuss as much the access to pornography by children. In everything I've discussed so far, obviously I'm very much a hater of dark romance, but would banning this sort of literature like be the way to go? I don't actually know, because I know people are like, oh my god, slippery slope, like the government's gonna ban every book. That's probably not what would happen. But like, regardless, I think still putting that in the hands of like governments, I understand it's not always the best decision, because then they'll start banning like any romance book, which isn't the best thing, but whatever. I think what I would say is actually like the best thing to do initially, and the easiest thing to do as well, is to market these books correctly. For Alchemized, for example, it can't be marketed as just like a fantasy book. It has to be marketed as torture porn. Like, to continue on from that, books like these shouldn't just be available to anyone. I mean, there's obviously a huge problem with online pornography and how it's available to anyone at any time of any age, whether you're looking for it or you're not. But that's a separate issue. Okay, books like these can easily still be sold at bookstores, but like even kept at a specific 18 plus shelf, or like not being sold without checking ID. Like, you can't buy alcohol without ID. Just fucking like check their ID for the 18 plus torture porn book. Also, actually, why can't we treat like online porn like alcohol? Like, I am so for the need for like ID verification. I know people are like, oh my god, government's gonna steal your fucking data. Like, the government gave you the driver's license. Like, they know what it looks like. They know who you are. And also, if you do have a fear of the government stealing your data, then you can just like not watch porn. Actually, don't do it anyway, regardless of if you're scared of that or not. But obviously, when it's online, it's almost impossible to stop people from viewing it. Like, obviously, you can put these age requirements on websites like Pornhub, but like when I'm on Twitter, I see it without even wanting to. So like, can you really block it everywhere? No. However, for something like books, it actually could be quite a simple fix, both in online and physical marketplaces. But realistically, and just like with porn, the root of the issue is something much deeper. Pornography will, if we're being honest, like never cease to exist. But through feminist action, we can hope that like people will stop consuming it as much. Porn and dark romance are reflections of real social norms, of real things that happen in society, of real things that are romanticized, and also the gender roles of women and men. Like, if we were able to ever make some change in that regard, books like these and like extreme pornography would probably reduce the amount that they're produced and reducing the amount that they're consumed as well. But, you know, I'm being a little bit optimistic to see any actual change in that. Another, I suppose, way that romance can still be written and try to avoid these negativities is through something like positive consent, which would be seen as like the opposite of forced contact that characterizes like booty strippers and dark romance. Realistically, just authors being more imaginative in their writing, and especially into how more like equal sexual relationships can be formed in literature. Like, you're literally writing anything that you could ever possibly write and imagine you can write in a book. Yet you want to fall back on these same stereotypes and same social gender norms which are already present in the real world. Like, you could write literally the best heterosexual relationship ever, and you just choose to write like rape, torture, porn. Like, why would you do that? As I mentioned earlier, and I told you to remember this, did you remember it? Women are a social class. Whatever is done or supposed or concluded about one person is applied to all women. Women are like so far from even acknowledging that women are a class, even further from class consciousness. Obviously, by the fact that women still read these dark romance books or defend pornography, it's pretty clear that we are not getting any class solidarity. These types of women have just kind of been forced into a weapon to keep the patriarchy functioning and to avoid female solidarity, as I said, against the things that continually harm us, most specifically rape. In Sathi Patel's recent essay for Total Woman Victory, I've talked about them before. They're basically an organization that publishes radical feminist zines online that I'd really recommend you read. Anyway, in one of her recent essays, she discusses Susan Brown Miller's work in historicizing rape. I think this is really relevant here, and also when discussing dark romance and how it applies to the real world. And it's also crucial for women to understand, particularly those who are able to romanticize rape in the context of dark romance. Patel writes, quoting Brown Miller for the most of this essay, Brown Miller frames rape as a conscious, historically, and socially produced weapon of male domination, as opposed to a product of biology, individual pathology, or sexual instinct. This is especially related to the common concept in dark romance of rape being about extreme sexual desire, or even male sexual instinct. Or, this extreme desire for the female main character, which is often a self-insert for the reader. Like, they'll go so far as to rape a woman to show how much they love her, which is fucking crazy, but whatever. In Brown Miller's theory, she discusses how rape could have originated as a tool of domination issued by men. When the first woman ever, somewhere, resisted sexual violence, it forced rape to become a premeditated, planned, and deliberately executed action. Rape became a function of the patriarchy to keep women in their place, essentially. As Patel rewords by Brown Miller, rape cannot be reduced to merely the physical violation of a woman's autonomy, safety, dignity, and literal body, but also a weapon that engraves fear, vigilance, and discipline directly into women's nervous systems. Rape as such is the root of women's subjugation, forcing us into marriage and motherhood. It plays a huge role in warfare, as I discussed in my last episode, especially how, for example, a nation like Israel is using rape as a warfare tactic against the women of Palestine. It was forced as a function of the slave trade to force slaves to have more children, which would then be slaves. But importantly, as Brown Miller notes, fairy tales are a really important, grooming technique, I suppose, similar to dark romance, but for children. Fairy tales introduced rape's logic long before girls can read. Red Riding Hood was hunted for her defenselessness, Sleeping Beauty lying inert for years awaiting male activation, Cinderella's passive beauty rewarded only by male selection. Girl children learn that the most ideal femininity is a beautiful helplessness. Dworkin writes about this extensively in the first chapter of Woman Hating too, how fairy tales sort of force gender roles onto children. It's kind of like the first exposure that you have to romantic gender roles as a child. As such, these dark romance books have a similar role as childhood fairy tales, but with more adult themes and made for adults as well, to kind of continue this forced idea about gender roles that may have wavered as they grew older. No, let's further force them onto adult women through these dark romantasy stories. Through all different forms of media, the myth of female masochism is heavily forced onto women. It's not just fairy tales or dark romance. It's also all other forms of media. Patel writes, their power lies in the fact that men believe them and have convinced women that these myths are our truth as well. The insistence that women secretly desire rape, that we seduce men into violence, becomes a smokescreen that obscures men's behavior. It's not necessarily a fault of the women who read dark romance or watch pornography and the fact that they get enjoyment out of these things. It's been forced onto them, but it still does affect all women as a class. When you as a woman read these dark romance books and tell everyone how much you enjoy fantasizing about rape, that is inflicted onto all of us. Obviously that's a lie that you've been told by male fantasies and how men believe these male fantasies and force them onto women. Regardless, still as even a single person being I have rape fantasies or whatever, now men think that all women have these, and they will inflict that on all women because of how they view it. I mean, if you see any discourse on Twitter about pornography and rape fantasies and whatever else, you will see all of this research in the replies of men being actually women have rape fantasies, here are the statistics. And it's probably yeah, but again, it's not a spontaneous fantasy. It's come from men forcing it onto them their whole lives. That's also why I refer to dark romance as a grooming tactic, particularly in how exposed it is to young girls. It has become an extension of the fairy tale, but nowadays, especially with BookTok, 12-year-old girls are being told that they need to read these spicy five chili pepper spice level dark romance books, and it's they should not even have access to that sort of content as a young girl. Female class consciousness is therefore integral to break away from rape fantasies, which are indeed not an innate nature of women, but a male-made fantasy. Patel writes, women are given no real choice, either internalize the masochistic role assigned to us or remain unable to fantasize altogether. Under patriarchal conditioning, female erotic life becomes a mirror image of male domination. This is also a related concept too. Oftentimes, if you call out male fantasies and female fantasization, you receive criticism for being against women's sexual liberation, when in fact it's the exact opposite. To be unable to imagine or fantasize outside of male expectations for your sexuality is only an indication of how like brainwashed you've become by these male fantasies that have been forced onto you. It's also interesting how women are constantly said to have like rape fantasies, like in all that research that people publish. They're like, oh my God, all these women want to be raped. And it's like, actually, how about you do some research on how many men want to rape women? Because I definitely think it will show you that men have more rape fantasies than women do. I think that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode. To conclude, don't read a dark romance book. And also, if dark romance comes up in like real life conversation, start telling people to stop reading that shit. It's gross. That's my conclusion. Also, I wanted to add that I updated my referencing style in the description, so it should be easier to access anything if you were interested in anything that I quoted in this episode. Thank you guys for being patient while I made this, because honestly researching it took me a long time. So thank you guys so much for listening. Hope you learnt something. Hope you will never pick up a romance book again, and have a great 2026. Bye.